the ambition or the vision of the organization was to ensure that 100 million women, our estimate was that close to 1 billion women are excluded from formal financial system. And our vision was, of that 1 billion, 100 million could we bring them into the formal financial system, for which we had a 10-year roadmap. And I'm happy to say that we'll probably hit that this year. We are closer to about 80 odd million this year. In our 8-year journey, invested close to about 100. We've raised about 150 odd million. We've invested about 105. We are in the process of investing the second series. The gender neutrality doesn't cut it, because if that had worked, we wouldn't have these kind of enormous gaps that we find in the country, right? 23% of women have access to credit. I mean, when we actually looked at, how many women have smartphones, how many have access above the age of 15, we actually came to a very large number of 200 million. We actually released a report on this called UPI for Her last year.
I want to understand, when we are speaking of bias, are we talking about a gender-based bias that comes in the lender's policies or the policymakers when the funnel comes? Hello and welcome to an exciting new episode of Fintech Ki Baat Dil Se. Today it's a very unique episode. We haven't done yet anything like this on Fintech Ki Baat. We are going to talk about women empowerment, financial inclusion and overall inclusion as well, and how essentially we kind of build a business world that treats both the genders equally inside and outside BFSI, right? And to talk about that, we have with us Kalpana Ajayan, who's the regional head of Women's World Banking. So Kalpana, thank you so much for your time and doing this today. It's a pleasure having you here, and we are excited to take this forward with you.
Thank you so much, Shreyas, for having me here. It's equally my pleasure to be here and advocate for women. And that's very much part of the job that I do. And I welcome for partnerships such as yours, to bring about the broader awareness, around women's financial inclusion. So thank you. Pleasure being here.
Indeed, and this sounds really an impactful job that you're doing, Kalpana, and would love to hear about it. But before we dive into it, we want to hear a bit about your background, how has your career spanned out, and what got you into this?
Thanks, Shreyas. So, I'm a banker by training and profession. I have over 25 plus years of experience in retail banking, predominantly retail. I worked with institutions such as Citibank, HSBC, the Edelweiss Group. And I've done all kinds of roles. I've done roles in product, in distribution. I've had P&L responsibilities of heading a business, in customer experience and servicing, and surprisingly, even an HR stint.
Amazing.
Really, I've done all of those roles in my 25 plus years of experience, and really, even while doing all of this, serving others, serving the underserved has always been a passion of mine. I've always volunteered. And so this was always something that I did on the side. I was in the Edelweiss Group, for instance, Edelgive Foundation, which is their CSR arm, was very interested in developing programs for their mentorship program for their founders, etc. The founders of the NGOs that they cater to, and I genuinely enjoyed it. And this kida around impact at scale was something that stayed with me, and I'm like, how can I bring my years of experience to something which is meaningful? And I was deeply passionate about women, of course. And I find myself here doing this now for about 3.5 years. I joined this organization in January 22, as the regional head South Asia for Women's World Banking, which is a 45-year-old institution that is focused on women and financial inclusion. They're headquartered in New York, and it was started by 3 very, ambitious women, I might add. Where a Wall Street banker by the name of Michaela Walsh, Esther Oklu, who's an African, entrepreneur who was very focused on women, and The third is somebody that you would be familiar with, is Ela Bhatt of
Mhm.
Singh. So,
Right.
organization has very much Indian roots, and was started, as I said, 45 years ago, saying that the women need to access. Women are excluded from formal financial system, and how do you include them into the formal financial system, and through inclusion, eventually or actually empower them. So that's something I'm enjoying. I'm thoroughly enjoying, I might add. And I will talk about some of the statistics. We've in India alone, we've reached close to about 53.4 million women that we've reached, where we've brought them into the formal financial system.
Amazing.
So it's been a fabulous journey, and learning almost every single day, Shreyas.
Amazing. I think 53 million women impacted is a very large number, and in today's day and age, this is actually a more necessary cause to pursue and execute. It is not something that is now optional. This needs to be done, and it needs to be done yesterday. So I'm glad people are doing this, and WWE is out there, impacting. So tell our audiences a bit more about what exactly WWE does, how does it operate, and what are the channels through which it drives the impact.
As I said, we are a global non-profit, so we are headquartered in New York.
Mhm.
We also have an asset management company, and I'll come to that a little later. But these are the two large pieces of the organization. The work that we do is in 3 priority markets: South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. The ambition or the vision of the organization was to ensure that 100 million women, our estimate was that close to 1 billion women are excluded from formal financial system.
Mhm.
And our vision was, of that 1 billion, 100 million could we bring them into the formal financial system, for which we had a 10-year roadmap. And I'm happy to say that we'll probably hit that this year. We are closer to about 80 odd million this year.
Wow.
In our 8-year journey. So we are actually reaching the number ahead of our plan.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And the way we go about doing it is actually, by working and partnering with policymakers, with regulators, with financial institutions, or any of these partnerships. And what we try to do is to design, develop products, policies, all of which that have the unique women's needs in its mind, understanding the woman's barrier. And so how can we work with these institutions to ensure that they offer the right product, we distribute it the right way, and ensure that her and her rights are protected. So it's work along all of these. So the primary work that we do through our regional presence in these 3 markets is through what we call advisory services. As I said, we partner with FSPs, financial service providers, and design and develop products and distribution channels which are women focused, or which have an ability to engender the trust of the women that we serve. The other one that we do is we do a lot of work on research, because all the work that we do, Shreyas, has a strong basis on research. I don't come up with solutions because
Of course.
I think it's a good solution. We actually work very closely with the women that we serve and draw out the insights to understand the context, her context and barriers. So research forms a very important part of the work. And then when we do all of this work of advisory, ultimately it needs to be advocated with the policymakers. So we work very closely with government, ministries, apex bodies. For instance, in India, we work with DFS, we work with the Ministry of MSME, we work with SIDBI, we work with NABARD, in addition to all the other financial institutions that we speak about.
Right.
The third piece that we do is, and I would say that's an extension of advocacy, is really the leadership and diversity program for regulators. This is very unique, Shreyas. Nobody else in the world does it. So, we've had 270 participants from 44 countries and 65 institutions participate in our leadership and diversity program. We have
That is amazing.
partnered with Sayed Business School, and what we do is bring the regulators and bring in the awareness about gender intentionality, why you should be gender intentionality when it comes to policy making, and what does it take, the leadership skills to actually ensure that the ecosystem actually responds, you're able to influence as a regulator that it gets implemented. So these are broadly the three kind of work streams for the non-profit. As I said, we also have an asset management company. We've invested close to about we've raised about 150 odd million. We've invested about 105. We are in the process of investing the second series. We invested, in women, in institutions around the globe, where we talk about, innovative, gender diverse, inclusive companies, right? And so we've invested, as I said, across the globe, in Africa, MENA, Latin America, in Asia. So this is another way. So it's not just about the work that we do. We also put in and invest in businesses that can actually further the women's financial inclusion journey.
Understood. So I think this is really, something that impacts at multiple points of contacts, right? From policy making to organizational policies. So from regulatory policy making to organizational policy making to actually execution and even driving product policies so that they are more gender intentional. I think that is a brilliant way to do it. And what I want to understand from you, we'll touch upon each of those touch points. But let's start with, let's say product policies. I've had the privilege of hearing you speak at one of the events wherein you were talking about insurance as a product, lending as a product, those two different products, right? And how are they currently structured versus how they could be structured to kind of make them more gender intentional and more inclusive. So let's start with that.
Oh, good. Thank you, Shreyas. Let's start therefore with credit.
Sure.
We do a ton of work on credit, not just in this geography, but across multiple geographies. Because it's a well-known fact that women are considered a risky proposition, and especially the women that we serve, which is I wouldn't call it the bottom of the pyramid. I would say that these are women in the margin, which is that they have had some access to credit. They want meaningful credit. Most of the credit is right now in the smaller ticket size or in the form of, in India, the whole joint liability group, the JLG,
Right.
very. So,
Yes.
the risk is spread across the group. And so the financial institution is willing to lend to the group, not the woman as an individual. JLG and group lending in this country has been a massive success, as you know, thanks to the self-help group movement, which is very vibrant in this country, as it has enjoyed a huge successful history for the last 20-25 years. But once a woman has tasted that success as being a part of the group and taken a small loan, set up something as a nano or a micro enterprise, she wants to expand, she wants to grow, she wants to employ more women. And that's when she hits the first bottleneck. Because while the appetite for lending as a group exists, women as an individual, she has no collateral. She most probably runs an informal business. It's not registered. And she's not even visible. She's not even on the high street. She's probably running a business, in a small town in her house, from her house.
Right.
So she's largely invisible to most of the enterprises, to financial institutions. So this whole graduation loan, as we call it, from group to individual is available now, but at a very unaffordable rate. So earlier it was not even available. Now it is available, but at unaffordable rates. So I would say affordable loans is one thing. Ticket sizes that matter to her, Shreyas. Most of the ticket sizes are in the, Mudra has done a great job.
Right.
And the Shishu category, if you see, 80% is women. So everybody is very comfortable lending that 50,000 loan to this woman. But the problem is really the next set, which is your 50,000 to 2 lakhs, which is really not much. From an enterprise point of view, but for a woman, it's very meaningful, right? No appetite to lend to these women.
True.
So ticket sizes. Then the third one is a type of product. She wants a loan in which she can repay daily, weekly. She wants a working capital loan. Most of the microfinance, as you know, MFIs are term loans. So, all these are areas that you can work on when you talk about designing products that are relevant for women. But the largest one, and here I will switch to insurance. And insurance is really a distribution game as we know it.
Right.
You track the distribution, then you track the business, right? And there, while we have women agents and things like that, but still the last mile connectivity, how do we ensure women trust women? This is based on the work that we have done with millions of women in the self-help group in multiple states in this country,
Right.
Through the state rural livelihood mission, etc. And so, how do we then make these, small ticket, relevant product understandable? She does not understand the concept of insurance. The women
Exactly.
that we serve, insurance is hard to understand by anybody. It's a
Indeed.
technical product. So, how do we really make her understand, and speak to her in the language that resonates with her, and explain to her. Once we explain to her, she's very keen to take it. So how do you involve the the women network that is available at the ground? Somebody that is there in her ecosystem to actually distribute the product. So a lot of innovations that can be done on the micro insurance and in the the Sakhi, the BC Sakhi, the banking correspondent Sakhi channel, at the ground level. These are women that are in the rural in Bharat who are desperate for sources of income. And so this will actually be a win-win. It will be a good win for her because she gets a source of income and it's relevant for her. And our end consumer benefits because she is listening to somebody that she trusts, she's getting a product that makes sense to her. So this is the kind of product design that we are talking about, Shreyas.
Got it. So that is indeed really interesting. Would you want to touch upon how essentially these policies should be versus how they are to make them more gender intentional in terms of product policies?
This is a great question. A lot of the times, regulators and apex bodies, Shreyas, when I go and my team goes and talks to them, they take pride in being gender neutral. Oh yes, inclusion is very important for us. We believe in financial inclusion, but we are gender neutral. We treat men and women the same. They take a lot of pride in it, and so it's actually a lot of effort from our end to actually say that gender neutrality doesn't cut it, because if that had worked, we wouldn't have these kind of enormous gaps that we find in the country, right? 23% of women have access to credit. I mean, I can go on with various stats. So the fact is that you need to have gender intentional policy. What does that even mean? It actually means that you must have a very deliberate and a proactive way in which you design and implement these financial product or services. So I think the key word here is being intentional and being proactive. So when I'm doing a product design or when I'm doing a policy design, do I understand what are the practical barriers that come for a woman? Like, I mean, when I'm looking at lending policies and I'm doing credit policies, the over dependence and reliance on physical collateral, and we know the situation in India. The woman has no collateral. I mean, even if there is a property, it's not in her name. So how can we have products that do not rely on these physical collateral, but maybe information collateral? And there you lead again a stumbling block because she does not have any footprint. So how do you really ensure that you have, and the last one I would say is there's reliance on GPS, for instance. So sometimes it's also inadvertent, Shreyas. It's not even deliberate. It's just, it's an inadvertent. They think GPS is a great way of, using as a alternative for my credit scoring, not realizing that these women are running these businesses from their homes and come on the high street. So some of them, so we need to work with these people to ensure that, please be aware that these are the kind of constraints. So how do you therefore design, credit policies that actually reflect her lived reality? Because her lived reality is that she doesn't have anything. She doesn't have a financial footprint. She doesn't have a digital footprint. In this circumstance, how to make her credit worthy? How to because she's definitely not a bad risk. Because
Of
again,
course.
Shreyas, you know this data, and and it should not come as a surprise to you
Mhm.
that NPLs, when you do the gender disaggregation, NPLs always stack up great for women, right? They are at second, they are very loyal. Once you got their trust, she's not going to be shopping around and moving around. It makes very much business sense
Definitely.
to invest in women customers.
Indeed. And I think I'm not exactly sure of the source, and you could probably help me identify that. But I've heard this statement made by a few senior bankers when I was in these financial inclusion, panels and meetings, wherein there was this clear distinction on how women at near the grassroots level or slightly above that performed really well on their loans versus the men of the same category in terms of repayment, timely payments, and even proactively informing if they thought that they could not make it this month because of actual issues and making it up later on. And this has been established across the across geographies around the world. So what do you think kind of leads to this differentiation? Is this the intention, or is this purely something else?
So the one statement and I want to make, and is that
Sure.
most people assume women are risk averse.
Hmm.
And they would make statements like, "Oh, she's very risk averse. She doesn't want to take high loans.
Mhm.
She's very, she will not go into risky products and things like that." Our research and our work with women actually shows that she's actually very risk aware, not risk averse. So, to your question in terms of why is she paying on time and things, she understands what the implications are if she doesn't pay on time.
Hmm.
You'd be very surprised. I was in Patna about a month ago. We do fairly deep work with the Jivika, with their the State Rural Livelihood Mission.
Mhm.
And the women were rattling off their civil score sheets.
Wow.
Yeah, so
That's,
she knows. Yeah,
That's a surprise, at least at that socioeconomic class. It is really a surprise.
yeah, and she knows what will mess up with this. Like, I'll tell you one more thing. The work that we are doing with on insurance, we are doing some deep work on the state insurance plan in Himachal and Jammu and Kashmir with PNB MetLife, our partners. And when we are doing camps at the ground level for creating awareness about very simple products, the questions that she asks is like, right now I am putting my money in RD. How does this stack up from a returns point of view? So, it's very easy to dismiss that, she doesn't know, and she's not aware. But who is the person that manages budgets in any home?
True.
Right? And so
Yeah.
therefore there is a lot of awareness. It's just that she doesn't trust the formal financial system. She doesn't understand that. She's not made to feel welcome.
Mhm.
And so it's both ways, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she's made to feel welcome. She doesn't trust the system. So how do you really engender and this connection in a way that makes sense to both the financial service provider, because it makes business sense, and for the woman, because she gets access to the relevant products which can take her along the journey of financial empowerment.
Makes sense. And I think risk aware is a completely new dynamic versus risk averse, and that should be treated as is, right? Versus I have seen even at current this thing, like even in the social circles that I would be in, a lot of people take, a lot of colleagues of mine, males, essentially taking decisions that would normally be considered risky. And that risk awareness coming in at that socioeconomic class, right? Like if for example, if you're buying a new car, you want to understand what exactly is the percentage of loan that you should take, the kind of how it would map against your salary and all of those things, right? Dynamics. I think that risk awareness, if it is trickling down to women at that socioeconomic class and they are able to understand it, that is actually more better for the lenders, because they know what they're getting into and they're signing up for the right products, and that the intentionality from the lender's side should also be reciprocated, and I think that makes more sense. Perfect. Having said that, I want to understand from your perspective, when you talk about digital public infrastructure at large, how do you see that? And first of all, do you see that actually making a difference in terms of women financial inclusion? And if so, how do you see it kind of helping it along or doing that?
It's a great question, Shreyas, and of course, the DPI became a buzzword during our G20 chair period in 2023. Everybody
Right.
started understanding or hearing about digital public infrastructure, really. And we are very fortunate in this country, honestly, in India, because the emphasis and the importance and the investment that has been made on digital public infrastructure has been phenomenal. Like, what would have taken 50 years for us to move the dial when it comes to financial inclusion? Just the investment in the key DPI, and here I'm referring to Aadhaar, your digital identity, which is like the absolute basic.
Right.
I'm talking about the 55 odd crore Jan Dhan accounts that have been opened, no frills account. I'm talking about the investment in UPI, right? The whole payments layer. All of this have made a significant difference. So, our inclusion rate in 2008, Shreyas, was somewhere around 25%. Right now, it's close to 80%. 80% of the adult population actually are included. Now, this growth from 8 to now has only what it would have taken actually 50 years if we had continued without a DPI. That's how impactful DPI has been in this country. And when I actually look at the comparison in other geographies, I'm just totally amazed at the scale, because India is all about scale. Right? Open, scalable solutions that have been created with these, with starting with the digital identification layer. I mean, if you had to include anybody, leave alone women, they didn't have phones, they didn't have an identification, nothing, even 15 years ago. Now everybody has an Aadhaar.
Right.
Everybody has a Jan Dhan account. So then it becomes so much more easier to roll out programs. So for instance, and this was so obvious and so relevant, and we were doing this tracking across geographies during COVID time. Like this population, as you can imagine, is the most vulnerable for any kind of calamity, right? I mean, most vulnerable segment, this segment at the bottom.
Right.
And so for government to actually roll out, the whole direct benefit transfer, if it were not for the Jan Dhan account, how could they have reached it to the last mile? Right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's like amazing what the government has done. So, and so when you are designing, the gender disaggregated data, so when I'm looking at, how many Jan Dhan accounts, 55% of the Jan Dhan accounts are women. I can even peel the onion a little bit and say how many of them are zero balance. Because one of the other big issues that we had was, yes, there are accounts, but is it actually being used? Does the woman really think it's only for direct benefit transfer, or does she know that this is a full-fledged savings account, which she can use for other things and even other benefits, like even micro insurance and pension? So access and usage both become very, very useful and accelerated because of digital public infrastructure. And so, it's been I think India has achieved what it has in the inclusion space only thanks to digital public infrastructure. I would thumb the table on that.
Indeed. No, I completely agree with you on this, that the kind of inclusivity and the database that it has created, while people should debate on kitne accounts use ho rahe hai, kitne account khali pade hain, and all of that, which is a secondary problem to solve. The initial problem is that people now at least have accounts, right? At some point of time, they can use it. They know that they have that account. They can link it to UPI. They can start using it for insurance or for FDs or for savings, and that is a starting point. It's not easy to, get so many people banked in the first place. That is an achievement. And then activation is a second order problem to solve for. And that can always be done by awareness campaigns, localized, regional or national level. That can be done. And while it will take time, it will happen, right?
Not just awareness, Shreyas. Here I would interject that, you need to have relevant products. And here I would argue things like UPI. Payment is invariably her first step. So for, that with a savings bank account, luckily we, unlike Africa, which is a wallet-based one, we have a banking-based, UPI interface, right? So therefore you already have a banking account, and all you had to do was to, log into any of these payment accounts for you to actually start your journey into the formal financial system. So it's been phenomenal to see the growth in the last few years.
Indeed. I completely agree with you, and this is actually a wonderful first step for a nation like ours. Having said that, right, what essentially have you seen at ground level? What kind of activities have been most impactful that you have seen to, one, create financial awareness, and second, financial activation, as I like to call it, basis either the first transaction or first bit of saving when it comes to the specific diaspora that WWP addresses?
No, that's a great question. And so here you need to involve the ecosystem, Shreyas.
Mhm.
So while I work with the end consumer in terms of ensuring that there is awareness, etc., building trust, I equally need to ensure that the financial institutions, be it a bank, be it a fintech, be it an insurance company, be it an MFI, they see the business case in investing in the women. So I need to bring both. And then you have the policy of the regulatory authority, also pushing. While it can be from bottom up or top up,
Right.
top down also helps, right?
Of course.
So in this, Shreyas, what is very, very important is to show them the business opportunity or the business case, as we call it. And that can be met in many ways. For instance, the work that we did with very large public sector banks, we did it with Bank of Baroda, Indian
Mhm.
Bank, and Union Bank of India. Our premise was that savings comes very naturally to women. Savings is something that she does. Every woman saves. She may be saving in possibly and keeping it in the kitchen or under the pillow, but savings comes naturally. I don't need to tell her how to save.
Hmm.
But how do you bring this savings from the informal into the formal fold? Was the problem that we were trying to solve. And we said,
Makes
okay,
sense.
small savings is something that's intuitively she understands. When I'm saying small savings, I'm talking about 500 rupees a month. That's all I'm saying. If I'm able to make you, the woman, bring this 500 rupees in a systematic manner, even for say 5 months, then
Right.
what we did was we linked it to an overdraft. And all of these, by the way, are constructs of the Jan Dhan product itself. It was not something that I created.
Right.
And so all that we did was to bring the structure around this discipline of small savings. And so this 500 rupees will unlock a 10,000 rupee overdraft, something that we brought to the awareness. And we did this through camps, etc. And what we actually showed to these banks was a 25,000 crore CASA opportunity. That's all. I mean, it would seem like, oh, it's just 500 rupees, but this is massive.
That's a huge
in
opportunity.
terms of a scale. And also remember, right now also the country is struggling with CASA balance, and you would have seen the statement from the FM to waive off the no balance fee and stuff like that, because money is flowing to markets. How do you make it stay in the CASA account, etc., etc. It would all make all the more sense for people to focus on Jan Dhan accounts.
Exactly.
So that's one way of doing it and showing the business opportunity. Similar for credit, and we can do it for insurance as well. We did it for payments, Shreyas. We did a good activity for NPCI, where we partnered with them last year, and we showed them that the gap on mobile phone ownership and access to internet. Of course, the GSMA report has always been there, and there's a clear difference between women smartphone ownership and men smartphone ownership. The gap has come down, but the gap still exists. And so, but when we actually looked at, okay, how many women have smartphones, how many have access above the age of 15, we actually came to a very large number of 200 million. We actually released a report on this called UPI for her last year. And to show that, this is the opportunity, and all of you payment companies, fintech companies, please go after. This is the opportunity. We're pointing and pointing that up. So this came through research, and we then piloted some activities. They're actually going to take it to the regional rural banks as well, where and where we are trying to bring in UPI as a product to these end consumers of regional rural bank who are really ultimately in Bharat, and possibly risk being careful about using digital payment system, wary about using it, and so therefore how to engender that trust, and here I would say consumer protection and awareness and digital financial capability or literacy plays a very important role.
True.
So you will only embolden her and engender her trust and confidence if you create that awareness about product, make her digitally literate and capable. And so it's skills, attitude, but equally figuring out how she will respond and make it a habit. And some of the work that we did on payments was very encouraging. Once she gets comfortable with the payment platform, she starts doing phenomenal number of transactions, much more than what we expected. We thought she'll do up to about maybe 5 transactions. She was doing 8 transactions a week. She was very comfortable. Wow. Yeah, and this is, by the way, our learning across the geographies. She only needs that initial hand holding. Once you have done that, she doesn't need you. She's very comfortable, but she of course needs a redressal mechanism. She needs somewhere that she can go to if she runs into a problem. As long as you show that to her, they have no problems in adopting these new technologies, newer ways of engaging with the financial system.
That's amazing. I think that's actually actually great to hear that the adoption has been a lot more quicker and they've welcomed this these technologies with an open arms. Talking about newer technologies, right? I think one of the most powerful drivers of financial inclusion across the segments could be AI if used properly, right? And would want to understand your view on how WWP as an organization and you as kind of the impact creator is looking at AI to kind of drive this impact, and make it scale this up a lot more quicker and more efficiently.
I think any conversation on anything financial and especially financial inclusion is incomplete without talking about AI. So with you on that, Shreyas, completely. Really, what AI has unlocked, and we have done some work on lending algorithms across multiple geographies to see that with the whole AI-driven approach for most fintechs and lending fintechs and that. Is there an inherent bias when it comes to lending to women? Because very small portfolio of the lenders' portfolio is actually women customers, isn't it? So it's a chicken and egg situation. And so is that leading to more bias? Because if only 8% of my population, of my portfolio is women, then where is the ML happening? Like it's happening more, right? So is that driving a bias?
The training set is creating more bias because of the lack of more diverse data. Yes.
But when we actually tested it in 3 geographies, we did this in Mexico, Colombia, and India. We actually, to our surprise, found that there was no bias when it came to actual, lending because of algorithmic bias. But here, and I'm using a big but, there were bias in every step of the way. From where we were sourcing, to how we were communicating, to how we were servicing, to how we were disbursing. At every stage, there was bias in the lending process. AI plays a very important role, and when used, responsible AI, I think, is a term that is being used by everybody. So when it comes to lending, it's about responsible lending. Equally, it's about responsible borrowing from the other end. So for making women understand, as I was telling you, women understand CIBIL scores, women understand what it would be if I don't repay on time, etc., etc. So AI has played a very significant role in terms of just the reach and the last mile connectivity. And in this, the underserved segments are most benefited, because somebody sitting in a remote geography, it would have been impossible to reach if not for AI.
Of course.
But just one point in this, please. Always bring it, and this is also coming from our work that we, the asset management where we have invested, Shreyas, is that women in fintech is a very, very small population sliver.
True.
So if you want to serve more women, you need to have more women in your employment, not just in the boards, not just in the senior management, but across levels. And so we actually advocate quite a bit in all our investments that we do, and we see direct correlation, by the way, in the portfolio in the part, when we do the portfolio analysis, we are actually able to see, when we see across the years, we are seeing a direct linkage when you have, when women are explained, and when you have more women employees and when women are becoming more aware, how much it reduces your NPLs and things like that. So having more women employed in fintechs I think is going to be another very important aspect when we are talking about AI.
Indeed. In this entire the last point that you made about AI making a difference and the biases that are existed, I want to understand, when we are speaking of bias, are we talking about a gender-based bias that comes in the lender's policies or the policymakers when the funnel comes through?
That's right, Shreya. So, for instance, if most of my sourcing aggregator agencies employ men,
Mm-hmm.
do you think a woman would be comfortable in a rural segment or in that, in that strata of society, will be comfortable talking about loans to a male agent?
Not always.
So, point is, so when we are talking about biases, so it's like one of our investing companies, Bike Bazaar, which is into two-wheeler financing. We found that in two-wheeler financing, mobility is a very important route for women to improve their earning. As you can imagine,
True.
she travels more, she's able to earn more.
Of course.
We are doing a ton of work with emerging segments like gig workers, informal workers, and mobility is a very important aspect, right? And so when you realize that when these distribution points, you only find male, right? So when a woman wants to buy a two-wheeler, how comfortable is she going to be talking to these to these male agents? I'm just giving you these examples.
No, agreed. No, I think it makes definitely sense.
Day after tomorrow, she has taken the loan and she has some questions. She's calling up the call center. How comfortable can she feel with the kind of biases? So it could be a woman in the call center, but unless she's provided some gender sensitivity, gender sensitization, saying these are the kind of barriers that a woman has. This is the kind of thing you should be talking to when it comes to women. We've done that. So at every stage there is bias, and in application form, if you say, and we've seen this in some of the other geographies as well, if you say hospital worker versus nurse, the bias is obvious, isn't it? When you say nurse, what do you think of? Versus how do you ensure that there is no bias and call it a hospital worker or a healthcare worker, right?
True.
So I mean there are ways in which you can address it, and the most important step there is to actually be aware that there can be a bias. Minute organizations understand that there is aware, most of the organizations that we work with are very, very happy to kind of ensure that there is no bias. I mean, I've never found intention lacking in any of these, and they also see that having these women in their portfolio is actually a good risk. But
True.
it's the awareness, that's a very important.
Makes sense.
And so simplify your lending process, have the marketing piece, have more gender intentionality, be more gender fair, develop relevant products for women, have a separate product for women. All of these are ways in which you can actually, address these biases.
Perfect. I think that, thank you for shedding light on that. I think what I also wanted to understand your view on, and this is probably a bit more controversial line of thought, is when you're talking about, let's say, a credit funnel that comes down to a lender, how would you see it, how would you see it operating in a gender neutral scenario wherein there is no gender mentioned on the file? Name is blood ultimately for the initial underwriting, of course, and those details will be given, versus a scenario wherein the policies are more gender intentional. How would your vis-a-vis each other, what would you think would make more of a positive impact?
So actually, when we looked at the step and when we looked at the algorithmic bias by masking, precisely we did all of that. We actually did not find too much of bias race. We did not find. There was only one market, one organization in Mexico where we found what was called reject inference bias, where there were a lot more applications were rejected, and then because when we applied the gender criteria, when you went back and you actually scrutinized it a little bit more, understanding the context, you could actually claw back quite a lot. You see, it's a sunk cost. You've already spent money in getting these application forms, and you are rejecting it based on false biases.
Right.
And so, and so that was actually beneficial for the for that institution, right? To answer your question, down the funnel, we actually did not find, from a purely algorithmic machine learning perspective, we actually didn't come across too much of biases. But as I said, the biases were in the sourcing, bias was in the servicing, bias was in the dispersal process. Those were the ones that had, issues.
The human layers.
Not so much, yes, exactly. Right. Not so much the machine. Right?
Understood. So the data isn't essentially, the data isn't actually creating a bias, but it's a inherent human bias in those geographies that's creating the issues.
Most of the fintechs seem to actually have built-in algorithm which doesn't take gender as a field. So they were conscious about it, and they actually were very keen to work with us to say, this is how we've built it, but can you tell me indeed if this is working out? And so they were actually happy to hear that their algorithms were actually didn't create that bias.
That's good to know. Good to know. Thank you so much for doing a bit of deep dive on that, Kalpana. Thank you so much.
No.
Moving on, I think this is probably the last question of the day. I think I've taken already too much of time, but I'll just hold you for one last question, and then I think we should be good. What essentially do you see as future plans for WWB on creating more impact? What technologies would you think you would be leveraging to kind of make that happen, and how do you see it in our span?
No, thank you, Shreyas, and it's been a pleasure talking.
Likewise.
Two big areas that we see as big focus areas for women's world banking when we talk about women's empowerment. Mm-hmm. One is the whole conversation around climate and resilience, and the second one is around consumer protection. Mm-hmm. Both these areas, we believe, requires a lot of attention going forward. Climate vulnerability, I think, is something that we all completely understand, but what I want to share with you is a couple of data points, right? We have done research to show that 753 million women in the most climate vulnerable countries around the world, they lack the financial tools to save, borrow, receive payments, especially after a climate disaster. So that number I want you to keep in mind, 753 million. Next is, even if when a disaster happens, nearly 800 million women in climate vulnerable countries do not have a way to receive payments. We were just speaking about DPI, we were speaking about direct benefit. So it's not an issue in India. Thanks to DPI, that's not an issue. But in most geographies, that's a serious issue because they don't have bank accounts. They don't have a digital identity. So how do I even know I need to send, who you are, and first identify, and then second figure out a way to reach the relief to you, right? And
Makes
this
sense.
is very real, right? So there is so critical to have, these kind of infrastructure, from a climate vulnerability, and we are doing a lot of research in terms of the kind of investments that are required, for climate vulnerability. We recently did something in India and Indonesia to see what kind of capital is required, because all the capital is being sucked by very, very large scale projects, for energy efficiency and things like that, not really focused on the end consumer bit. So, how to really draw attention to that problem and ensure that actually capital flows where it is required when there is, from both an adaptation and from a resilience point of view. So that's something that's of huge interest to us, including insurance. I mean, that's an obvious one, right, Shreyas?
Of course.
Insurance is, resilience. It obvious need it caters to is resilience, but how do you ensure that you have the relevant products? The second part where we also want to focus with the whole digitization is the consumer protection, right? It matters, right? There is deepening digitization. So how do you bring in this whole digital financial capability to most women, ensure they understand what the risks are, understand and are aware about the redressal mechanism? What more can we do? If we have this whole Viksit Bharat and 5 trillion and all of those dreams, right? How do you bring the rest of the Bharat and improve their per capita income using digital means? Because it's only possible to hit that kind of growth using digital means. But with it comes, the whole bunch of fraud and, and all of that, right? So how to really ensure we have trustworthy systems that actually drive this inclusive fintech. Is again something that's of an area of interest, and we are talking to large organizations around this
Mhm.
to see that women are not at risk, more risk,
Right.
compared with all that is happening. Yeah.
Makes sense. No, I think that is amazing, and I'm super excited about the impact that WWE is going to create in the next half a decade and probably more. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be hearing about it all over the news and everything. So super excited, and please keep doing what you guys are doing. It's amazing, and thank you so much for the time that you gave to us today.
No, Shreyas, thank you. As I said, advocacy is a very important part of the work that we do. We need to
Indeed.
get the message across to as many, and I consider people like yourself as partners in our journey in
Thank you so
advocacy.
much.
So thank you so much for partnering with people like us to bring about awareness and understanding about women's financial inclusion and empowerment. It's a pleasure talking to you today, Shreyas.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.